On December 20th, 1820, John Bell, Sr. of Robertson County, Tennessee, died after a prolonged and unusual illness. The account of his passing, documented by his son, Richard Williams Bell, states that a mysterious vial of liquid was found in the family's medicine cabinet. A voice, which had reportedly tormented the family for 3 years, claimed responsibility for the substance and for administering it to the patriarch. In the official history of the state of Tennessee, the death of John Bell is recorded as the only instance in which a supernatural entity was held responsible for a person's demise. The core of this record is not just a death, but a long, detailed, and methodical assault on a family by an unseen, intelligent, and articulate force. The events took place in a rural community located in the northern part of Robertson County, Tennessee, near the Red River. The area today is known as Adams. The central figures were the family of John Bell, a farmer who had relocated from North Carolina in approximately 1804. Bell was a respected elder in the Red River Baptist Church and had acquired over 300 acres of farmland. He and his wife, Lucy Williams Bell, lived in a large log house with several of their children. By 1817, the family was well established and prosperous. The key members of the household at the time the phenomena began were John and Lucy Bell, their daughter Elizabeth, known as Betsy, who was 12 years old, and their son Richard Williams Bell, who was 6. It is Richard's later manuscript, titled Our Family Trouble, written in 1846, that forms the primary basis of the narrative. This manuscript was later incorporated into a commercially published book in 1894 by journalist Martin Van Buren Ingram, titled An Authenticated History of the Bell Witch. Contextual events preceding the disturbance are minimal, but potentially relevant. There are accounts of a financial dispute between John Bell and a neighbor named Kate Batts over a land transaction. Bell was also reportedly excommunicated from his church over a business dealing involving usury, an event which would have been a significant source of social and personal strain in that time and place. For more than a decade, however, the Bell family's life on the Red River was by all accounts unremarkable. The farm was productive, the family was integrated into the community, and their daily existence followed the predictable rhythms of 19th century agrarian life. This period of stability came to an end in the late summer of 1817. The initial events were subtle and easily dismissed. They began not inside the home, but on the periphery of the family's property. These early occurrences were isolated and ambiguous, giving no indication of the severity of the events that would follow over the next 3 years. The community in which the Bells lived was one of deep religious faith, but also one where folklore and superstition were woven into the fabric of daily life. The landscape itself, with its dense woods, rolling hills, and dark river bottoms, was a natural setting for stories of the unexplained. The nearest large settlement was Clarksville, but the Bell farm was situated in a more remote area where neighbors were separated by considerable distances. Help and objective observation were not always immediately available. The narrative of the Bell family's experience is unique in American folklore for its duration, its specificity, and the sheer number of witnesses who allegedly experienced its phenomena. Unlike a fleeting sighting or a momentary strange sound, the disturbance at the Bell farm was a prolonged siege. It was an event that reportedly evolved, communicated, and demonstrated a clear and hostile intelligence. The first recorded incident occurred when John Bell was inspecting his cornfield. He reported seeing a strange animal sitting in the middle of a corn row. He described it as having the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. Bell took aim with his rifle and fired at the creature, but it vanished without a trace. He searched the area but found no physical evidence of the animal. This was the beginning. Soon after, the phenomena moved to the family home. At night, the family began to hear faint knocking and scratching sounds on the exterior walls and door of their log cabin. Initially, They attributed the noises to animals or mischievous travelers. However, the sounds grew in intensity and frequency. They became loud, insistent beatings that seemed to travel around the house. The source could never be located. The activity then migrated inside. The family would be awakened by the sound of what they described as rats gnawing on their bedposts. They heard the sound of chains being dragged across the wooden floors and heavy stones being dropped from a great height. A new sound emerged, a gulping or choking noise, as if someone was strangling. The entity remained invisible, but its auditory presence was becoming constant and undeniable. The physical manifestations began to target the children directly. The youngest children reported that their bed covers were being violently pulled from them in the middle of the night. An unseen force would pluck pillows from under their heads and toss them across the room. The focus of this physical activity soon centered on 12-year-old Betsy Bell. She complained of being slapped, pinched, and scratched by an invisible hand. Her hair was pulled with such force that it seemed she was being lifted from her bed. Red welts and handprints would reportedly appear on her skin with no visible cause. After several months of these escalating disturbances, the entity began to communicate. It started as a faint, whistling sound, which then evolved into whispered words that were difficult to understand. Over time, the whispers grew into a clear, articulate voice. When asked who or what it was, the entity gave various answers. At times, it claimed to be the spirit of a person who had been buried nearby. At other times, it simply called itself a spirit. It eventually adopted the name Kate, a name that became synonymous with the haunting itself due to the family's existing tensions with their neighbor, Kate Batts. This voice was not limited to simple communication. Witnesses, including visitors to the Bell home, claimed it could quote scripture verbatim, sing hymns, and carry on intelligent conversations on a range of topics. It could accurately repeat sermons that were being delivered simultaneously in two different churches 13 miles apart. It also demonstrated a distinct personality. It could be witty and engaging, but it was most often profane, cruel, and malevolent. The entity expressed a particular fondness for Lucy Bell, John's wife, often complimenting her and leaving her gifts of fresh fruit. Conversely, it professed an intense, unrelenting hatred for John Bell and his daughter Betsy. The entity's attacks on John Bell intensified. He began to suffer from strange neurological symptoms. His tongue would feel thick and swell in his mouth, making it difficult for him to speak or eat. He experienced severe facial twitching and seizures that would contort his muscles. The entity would taunt him relentlessly during these episodes, its voice mocking his suffering. In one frequently cited incident, an unseen force repeatedly pulled John Bell's shoes from his feet as soon as he put them on. The phenomena became a local sensation. People traveled from hundreds of miles away to witness the events at the Bell farm. Many left convinced of the entity's reality. A prominent, though likely apocryphal, account involves a visit from General Andrew Jackson. According to the legend, as Jackson and his entourage approached the Bell property, their wagon suddenly stopped, and no amount of effort could make the horses move forward. A disembodied voice then reportedly announced that it would allow them to proceed, and the wagon moved freely once more. The legend claims Jackson and his men were so disturbed by the events of that night that they fled the farm the next morning. The entity's stated goals became clear over time. First, it was determined to prevent the marriage of Betsy Bell to a local young man named Joshua Gardner, whom she was courting. It tormented the couple relentlessly whenever they were together. Second, and more ominously, the voice repeatedly and explicitly stated its intention to kill John Bell. By late 1820, John Bell's health had deteriorated significantly. In December of that year, he fell into a stupor from which he could not be roused. On the morning of December 19, 1820, John Bell was found unresponsive in his bed. His son, John Bell Jr., went to the medicine cabinet to retrieve his father's medication and discovered a small, smoky-colored vial containing a dark liquid that no one in the family recognized. At that moment, the voice of Kate spoke, loudly proclaiming that it had given John Bell a dose of the vial's contents while he slept and that it would end his suffering. The family, deeply alarmed, tested the liquid by giving a single drop to the family cat. According to the account, the cat died almost instantly. The family then threw the vial into the fireplace, where it erupted into a bright blue flame and shot up the chimney. John Bell died the following day, on December 20th. The entity was reportedly disruptive during his funeral, singing loudly and gleefully as his body was lowered into the ground. Following John Bell's death, the severity of the activity in the home began to decrease. A few months later, in March of 1821, Betsy Bell broke off her engagement to Joshua Gardner. After this, the entity known as Kate announced that it was leaving, but that it would return in 7 years. The phenomena largely ceased. The promised return in 1828 was reportedly a brief and less violent affair, primarily involving conversations with John Bell Jr. The narrative passed into local legend, a story told and retold, but the core events remained confined to that 3-year period. Several theories have been put forth to explain the events. The most direct explanation, taken from the historical accounts, is that the Bell family was subjected to the activity of a paranormal or preternatural entity. This theory posits that a disembodied spirit, whether human or demonic in origin, possessed the ability to speak, interact with the physical world, and directly influence the health of an individual. Adherence to this viewpoint to the large number of outside witnesses and the specific, detailed nature of the phenomena as evidence. A second theory posits a complex human hoax orchestrated by Richard Powell, the local schoolteacher who was reportedly in love with Betsy Bell. In this scenario, Powell, perhaps with the help of accomplices and even Betsy herself, used ventriloquism, trickery, and hidden devices to simulate the haunting. The motive would have been to sabotage Betsy's relationship with her suitor, Joshua Gardner. This theory is supported by the fact that the entity's primary goals were achieved. John Bell, who may have opposed the match with Powell, was dead, and Betsy's engagement to Gardner was broken. Betsy Bell did, in fact, marry Richard Powell several years later. A more recent and scientific explanation focuses on the death of John Bell. Dr. Megan Mann, a professor of chemistry, has proposed that the symptoms John Bell experienced are highly consistent with chronic arsenic poisoning. Arsenic was widely available in the 19th century as a primary ingredient in rodenticides common on farms. Long-term exposure to small doses would explain the neurological symptoms, such as dysphagia and facial twitching. The dark liquid in the vial could have been a final, acute dose. This theory is further supported by the family's account of a blue flame erupting when the vial was thrown into the fire, as the element arsenic produces a distinct blue color when burned. This suggests John Bell was murdered, and the haunting was an elaborate, 3-year-long performance designed to provide a supernatural cover for the crime. The perpetrator could have been anyone with access to the home. Another line of skeptical inquiry, advanced by researcher Joe Nickel, questions the authenticity of the primary source material itself. Analysis of the text of Our Family Trouble, purportedly written by Richard Williams Bell in 1846, reveals anachronisms. For example, the text uses the word detective, a term not in common usage in America until the 1850s. The writing style and vocabulary also bear a striking resemblance to that of M.V. Ingram, the journalist who published the story in 1894. This has led to the theory that Ingram may have fabricated the entire manuscript, or at least heavily embellished a simpler local folk tale, creating a piece of folklore rather than documenting a historical event. 2 centuries have passed. The original Bell family home no longer stands. The principal figures are long dead, and no definitive physical evidence from the period survives. What remains is a narrative, a detailed and internally consistent account of an impossible series of events. Was the Bell family the victim of a malevolent, incorporeal entity that defied all known laws of nature? Or does the story conceal a human tragedy of immense cunning, a calculated, long-term poisoning masked by a masterful theatrical deception? The records are silent on a verifiable truth. The events on the Red River remain suspended between documented history and folklore, leaving only the unsettling ambiguity of the voice in the dark.